Modern maps label vast stretches of our planet as empty wastelands, but those same sands hold the ruins of spectacular cities and the echoes of mighty empires. This video uncovers the full story of desert kingdoms, societies that not only survived but spectacularly thrived for centuries in regions we would consider unlivable today. You will learn the precise strategies that allowed civilizations to flourish in extreme aridity, knowledge that reshapes our view of human potential. How did a people build a metropolis of rose-red stone in a barren valley? What allowed a society to farm the deepest Sahara? By the end, you will see these landscapes not as barriers, but as canvases for incredible ingenuity. What does true resilience look like to you? Our modern world views a desert as a place of absence. We see a landscape defined by what it lacks: water, forests, and the easy comforts of fertile ground. This perception creates a powerful illusion, a mirage of emptiness that has long colored our understanding of history. But to the people who built lasting civilizations there, the desert was not empty at all. It was a world brimming with subtle resources and clear advantages, a canvas awaiting a specific kind of genius. These were not desperate survivors clinging to a wasteland. They were architects of opportunity who saw potential in the stark clarity of sun and stone. The very first secret to their centuries of success was this fundamental shift in perception. Where we instinctively see a barrier, they saw a foundation. Recent technology of this illusion in a dramatic way. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar now reveal the ghostly outlines of ancient farms, road networks, and entire settlements lying just beneath the drifting sand. These are not small campsites, but the vast, organized footprints of complex societies. Each new discovery adds another piece to a map we never knew existed, proving conclusively that our current charts of these regions tell only the most recent, and perhaps the quietest, chapter in a long human story. To truly grasp how a desert kingdom could flourish, we must first learn to see the landscape through their eyes, to trade our checklist of lacks for their inventory of hidden strengths. This reframing is everything. It transforms the story from a mystery of survival into a masterclass in sophisticated adaptation. The desert was their home, not their prison, and they understood its language in ways we are only beginning to decipher. Water was the ultimate currency in these arid realms, and the first great pillar of their prosperity was a mastery over it that borders on artistry. These societies were not just finding water, they were conducting it, orchestrating its flow across vast distances with an elegance that modern engineers still admire. This was not about digging a simple well, it was about creating entire hidden rivers. Take the ancient Kanat systems pioneered in Persia and spread across empires. This was a breathtakingly simple yet profound idea. Workers would dig a mother well far out in the foothills, tapping into a deep underground aquifer. Then, with astonishing precision, they would tunnel a gently sloping channel back toward their city or fields, all by hand. The force of gravity alone would guide the water silently through the earth, emerging cool and clean at its destination, safe from the evaporating sun. This was civilization literally pulling life from the stone, a testament to long-term thinking and communal effort that could sustain a city for 1,000 years. But the ingenuity did not stop underground. In the rose-red city of Petra, the Nabateans faced a different challenge, not a lack of water, but its violent, sporadic delivery. Their desert home was prone to sudden, devastating flash floods, so they became masters of capture and control. They carved intricate networks of channels and dams into the cliff faces themselves, diverting floodwaters into a vast system of cisterns and reservoirs. They turned a destructive force into their greatest asset. Every drop of rare rainfall was accounted for, stored, and meticulously distributed. This was the key. it transformed a sporadic oasis into a permanent, reliable engine of life. With such guaranteed water, agriculture flourished in the most unexpected places. Lush gardens and productive farms could bloom in the heart of the desert, supporting populations that would be impressive even by today's standards for such a landscape. This control of water did something even more profound. It built the very framework of society. The individual who owned a well had power, but the community that built and maintained a qanat or a reservoir system had a kingdom. Managing these projects required organization, law, and social cooperation. Rules for water distribution were often the first written laws, and their fair enforcement was the bedrock of political stability. The ability to provide water consistently meant people could settle, specialize, and trade. It turned nomadic groups into citizens and chieftains into kings. The flow of water dictated the flow of wealth, of power, and of history itself. So when we look at the ruins of a desert city, we are not just looking at fallen buildings, we are looking at the ghost of a hydrological symphony, a testament to the human capacity to listen to a silent landscape and hear the promise of a river. Yet water alone, for all its life-giving power, could not build towering temples or forge tools. The desert offered another kind of wealth, one that lay in wait along the empty spaces between worlds. The silent rivers beneath the sand created life, but the relentless sun above threatened to take it away. This brings us to the second pillar of desert prosperity, an architectural genius that did not just provide shelter, but actively sculpted the climate itself. In a land where daytime heat could be unbearable and nighttime cold could be sharp, buildings were not mere dwellings, they were thermal regulators, living machines designed for balance. The most stunning examples are cities literally carved from the landscape. At Petra, entire temples and tombs were hewn directly into the rose-colored sandstone cliffs. This was more than a dramatic aesthetic choice. The rock itself became a giant thermal mass. Just as a stone by a river stays cool long into a summer afternoon, these thick walls absorbed the sun's intensity throughout the day, keeping interior spaces remarkably temperate. At night, as the desert air chilled, the slowly released warmth from the stone maintained a comfortable environment. This principle of thermal mass was a cornerstone of desert architecture, from the thick mud brick walls of Saharan Qaisars to the underground cities of places like Cappadocia. There, communities descended not just for defense but for climate. Several stories below the surface, the earth held a constant, cool temperature year-round, a natural sanctuary from the extremes above. But perhaps the most elegant invention was the wind catcher, known as a badger in Persia. These towering chimney-like structures, often seen on ancient rooftops, were masterpieces of passive cooling. They were carefully oriented to catch the slightest prevailing breeze, funneling it down into the living quarters below. The air, often channeled over underground water reservoirs or through cool courtyards, would drop in temperature before flowing through the home, pushing the stale, hot air out through another opening. It was a natural, energy-free air conditioning system, a technology of pure airflow and intelligent design that hummed with the desert wind. This architectural intelligence had profound practical consequences. Cool, stable interiors were crucial for community health, providing refuge during heat waves that could otherwise cause widespread hardship. They enabled the safe storage of precious food and water supplies, preventing spoilage. Most importantly, they created spaces where daily life, craftwork, scholarship, and governance could proceed uninterrupted. A scribe could work on a treaty, a potter could fire ceramics, a merchant could tally goods, all within a bubble of human-made comfort while the external world raged with heat or cold. This control over the immediate environment was as vital as control over water. It allowed society to function with consistency and dignity. The desert kingdom did not fight its climate with brute force. It conversed with it using geometry, physics, and a deep understanding of materials to negotiate a lasting peace. The hum of a well-cooled workshop or the quiet flow of a qanat were the sounds of a kingdom building itself from within. But to truly flourish for centuries, these societies needed to look outward, to connect their carefully crafted oases to the wider world. This brings us to the third and perhaps most dynamic pillar of their prosperity: economic ingenuity and absolute dominance over the arteries of global trade. Picture the gates of a desert city at dusk. The air, now cool, is thick with the scent of dust, animal hide, and something far more exotic: frankincense. A caravan of hundreds of camels, their silhouettes etched against the fading sky, arrives from a journey of months. Their burdens are the treasures of continents: silk from the Far East, spices from India, gold and ivory from Africa, and that precious aromatic resin, incense, worth its weight in silver. This was not a rare event, it was the lifeblood of the economy. These kingdoms did not merely exist in harsh landscapes, they strategically planted themselves in the empty spaces between powerful empires, becoming the indispensable crossroads of the ancient world. The Nabateans controlled the incense road, the Saharan empires commanded the trans-Saharan routes, and the cities of the Silk Road's desert stretches held the keys to passage. Their economic model was brilliant in its simplicity. They did not necessarily produce the most valuable goods themselves. Instead, they controlled the path those goods had to travel. They provided what every weary, wealthy merchant desperately needed after months in the wilderness: security, water, fair marketplaces, and a place to rest and resupply. A city like Petra offered fortified caravanserais, reliable water from its intricate system, and a neutral ground for trade under the protection of the king. In return, they levied taxes and tariffs on every bundle that passed through their gates. Think of it as a toll road for the ancient world, but one that offered premium services. This transformed them from remote settlements into cosmopolitan hubs. The wealth that flowed in was not just monetary, it was cultural and intellectual. Along with bolts of silk came new ideas about astronomy. With sacks of pepper came knowledge of distant languages and technologies. This constant influx of outside goods and information prevented stagnation, making these desert capitals vibrant, worldly centers. Their own local products, often uniquely suited to the desert, became valuable exports. Salt mined from ancient lake beds, a vital preservative, could be traded pound for pound with gold. Dates, a resilient desert crop, provided essential nutrition for caravans and were traded far and wide. The economic result was a powerful paradox. These kingdoms, rooted in seemingly poor land, amassed fortunes that could rival those of fertile river valleys. They used this wealth to build monumental architecture, patronize the arts, and fund the very water and security systems that made their continued dominance possible. Their power was not held in a vault, it was etched into the trade routes themselves, a map of influence written in sand and followed by every merchant from Rome to China. This interconnectedness raises a profound question. If these kingdoms were so successful, so integrated into a global network, what could possibly cause their vibrant streets to eventually fall silent? The wealth of trade and the security of stone were powerful, but they could not by themselves hold a society together for generations. The true, enduring strength of a desert kingdom was woven from something less tangible: the social fabric of its people. In an environment where a single failed water project or a breached caravan agreement could mean collective hardship, how did these communities organize themselves? The answer lies in a profound social contract, one born from mutual dependence. To manage the vast, shared resources like a Kanat system, or to defend a lucrative trade route from raiders, a strong, cohesive structure was not a luxury, it was a necessity for survival. This often led to the rise of powerful, centralized authorities, kings or councils who could mobilize labor, enforce water rights, and maintain the peace that commerce required. In other cases, especially among nomadic groups, Deeply ingrained cooperative tribal structures served the same purpose, binding people through kinship and shared custom to protect the common good. The law in such places was often stark and practical, focused less on abstract rights and more on ensuring the community's physical continuity. This created societies where individual ambition was often channeled directly into communal benefit, for the simple reason that one could not thrive unless the whole kingdom did. Within this tightly knit social order, certain individuals held the keys to the kingdom's future, not through force of arms but through force of knowledge. The specialized experts of the desert were its most vital assets. The hydraulic engineer who understood the subtle slope of an aquifer was as crucial as any general. The astronomer, reading the stars to navigate the featureless dunes or predict seasonal changes, guided entire caravans to safety. The herbalist, with deep understanding of which desert plants could heal or nourish, acted as a guardian of community health. Their expertise, often passed down through guarded family lines or guilds, was not just respected, it was revered. This valuation of practical, life-sustaining knowledge created a unique intellectual culture, one where learning was directly tied to resilience. It fostered an environment where observation, experimentation, and careful record-keeping were matters of collective security, yet knowledge and good governance need a soul to animate them. The final, unbreakable thread in this social fabric was a powerful, shared cultural identity. Life in extremity has a way of forging a deep sense of us. This identity was constantly reinforced and celebrated through every available channel. Religion often provided a divine narrative for their struggle, framing their adaptation to the desert as a covenant or a test of faith, which in turn justified their laws and unified their purpose. Their art and architecture, from the monumental facades of Petra to the intricate geometric patterns woven into Saharan textiles, declared a distinct aesthetic born from their landscape, a visual language that said, "We are here and we are magnificent." And around countless night fires under a blanket of stars, oral tradition did the heavy lifting of memory. Epic poems and family sagas preserved history, celebrated heroes who discovered new springs or defended the caravan, and encoded survival lessons into memorable stories. This constant cultural reinforcement did something extraordinary. It transformed collective struggle from a burden into a source of immense pride and strength. The very hardship that defined their existence became the cornerstone of their identity, binding each individual to the kingdom not just by necessity, but by a profound sense of belonging and shared destiny. They were not merely living in the desert, they were the people the desert had made. This resilient spirit raises a final, haunting thought. If their social bonds were so strong and their adaptations so brilliant, what invisible force could possibly unravel a civilization that had mastered its world for centuries? The path into Petra begins with a narrow, winding crack in the earth, a fissure of towering rock known as the Sick. For nearly a mile, visitors walk through this shadowy corridor, the cliffs rising hundreds of feet on either side, the sky reduced to a thin, bright ribbon far above. The air is cool and quiet, the only sound is the echo of footsteps on stone. This dramatic entrance was no accident of geography. It was the first line of defense and a masterstroke of psychological theater. It built anticipation with every step, culminating in a view that still takes the breath away. As the Sick finally opens, the first glimpse of the treasury, Al-Khosne, appears, its ornate facade glowing with the rose-red hues of the sandstone perfectly framed. This was the grand announcement of the Nabatean kingdom, a statement carved not just in stone, but in the very experience of approach. They did not build on an open plain, they sculpted a fortress and a spectacle from the bones of the desert itself. This city, Petra, stands as perhaps the most complete case study of how a desert kingdom could flourish, not by overcoming its environment, but by becoming one with it. The genius began with a fundamental reimagining of water. The Wadi Musa, the valley where Petra sits, was prone to violent, sudden flash floods that could scour the landscape and destroy everything in their path. Where others saw destruction, the Nabateans saw potential. They became hydrological engineers on a monumental scale. Across the surrounding highlands, they constructed an intricate network of diversion dams and channels, expertly carved to intercept floodwaters at their source. These channels then guided the torrents into a vast, city-wide system of underground cisterns and holding tanks, some large enough to hold water for an entire neighborhood for months. They turned a catastrophic force into their sole, sustainable water supply. Every drop of rare rainfall was captured, stored, and meticulously allocated through ceramic pipes to public fountains, private homes, and lush garden terraces. This guaranteed resource allowed Petra to support a population estimated in the tens of thousands, a thriving metropolis in the heart of a rocky desert. Water security created the foundation, but trade built the empire. The Nabateans positioned Petra at the crucial crossroads of the incense route. Caravans laden with frankincense and myrrh, two of the ancient world's most valuable commodities, had to pass through this region. The Nabateans did not just tax this trade, they mastered it. They provided secure routes, reliable watering stations, and protection from raiders, essentially creating a safe and efficient logistics network. In return, they grew immensely wealthy, their coffers filled not with local produce, but with the silver and goods of the entire known world. This wealth did not vanish into treasure rooms. It was invested directly back into the city in the most dramatic way possible. Instead of constructing buildings from the ground up, they carved them from the cliff faces down. The iconic tombs, temples, and even a massive theater were all hewn directly from the living rock. This was more than an architectural style, it was a declaration of permanence and power. The rock provided natural insulation, incredible durability, and a seamless integration with the natural defenses of the canyon. Petra was a city that was literally part of the mountain, a perfect fusion of human ambition and geological reality. For centuries, this symbiosis worked flawlessly. The Nabateans used the desert's scarcity to create economic value, its violence to create a water system, and its rugged terrain to create an impregnable, breathtaking home. Petra was not a city in spite of the desert. It was a city because of the desert, a rose-red monument to the idea that the most formidable landscapes can inspire the most brilliant civilizations. Yet even Petra's stone could not whisper all its secrets, and its eventual silence points to a vulnerability shared by all desert kingdoms. The story of Petra is a testament to controlling what the desert gives, but another kingdom performed an even more audacious feat. They reached deep into the past to pull life from a time before the sand. Far to the west, in the vast expanse we now call the Libyan Sahara, lies the Fezzan region. Today it is a hyper-arid wilderness, a place defined by emptiness and scorching heat. Yet for over 1,500 years, from roughly 500 years before the Common Era to around 700 after, this was the heartland of the Garamantes civilization. They were not nomads surviving on the edges. They were settled farmers, city dwellers, and traders who built a network of towns and fortifications in what appears to us as one of the most uninhabitable places on Earth. Their existence completely shatters the image of the Sahara as an eternal, lifeless void. It was, for them, a fertile home, and their secret lay not in capturing rainwater, but in mining it. The Garamantes mastered an irrigation technology known as the foggara, a system similar to the Persian qanat but deployed in a far more extreme environment. They would identify locations where ancient fossil water, rainfall that had seeped into underground aquifers thousands of years earlier when the Sahara was green, lay closest to the surface. Then, with immense labor, they dug a series of vertical shafts down to the water table, sometimes spaced every 30 feet or so across miles of desert. These shafts were connected by a gently sloping underground tunnel that would guide the water by gravity to their fields and settlements on the surface. The scale was staggering, with hundreds of miles of these hidden channels transforming the landscape. This was agriculture on an industrial scale in the middle of a desert, supporting the cultivation of wheat, barley, figs, and dates, and sustaining a population that may have reached 100,000 people at its peak. Their capital, Garama, was a bustling urban center with multi-story buildings, public baths, and sophisticated crafts. They were not isolated, they were connected, trading across the Sahara for goods from the Mediterranean and sub-Saharan Africa, and their society showed clear signs of social stratification, with elite burials containing imported Roman glass and jewelry. They even engaged in conflicts, with historical records noting them as formidable opponents to the Roman Empire's southern frontier. The evidence of their civilization is written across the desert in the form of thousands of stone-built settlements, hilltop fortresses known as casas, and vast fields of burial mounds, memorial sites that speak to a long and settled presence. The story of the Garamantes, however, carries a profound and cautionary echo. They flourished by tapping a resource that was essentially finite, a treasure chest of ancient water that was not being replenished. Research suggests that over centuries of intensive farming, the water tables eventually began to fall. Maintaining the vast foggara networks against the relentless encroachment of sand became an ever greater struggle. Their brilliant adaptation contained the seeds of its own limitation, a reminder that even the most ingenious systems must ultimately reckon with the balance of what a landscape can provide. Their legacy is a powerful dual lesson, a celebration of human ingenuity in the face of extreme challenge, and a silent question about the sustainability of drawing too deeply from a well that cannot be refilled. This brings us to a turning point in our exploration, for if even the most resilient desert kingdoms faced such fundamental pressures, what were the common threads that ultimately led to their decline? The story of desert ingenuity does not end at the edges of the sand. It often begins precisely where the desert meets the river. To understand this dynamic, we travel south along the Nile to the land of Nubia and the powerful kingdom of Kush. Here, civilization flourished not in the deep desert interior, but in the challenging, marginal lands that bordered the great river's banks. This was a landscape of stark duality, the narrow ribbon of lush Nile fertility set against the vast, arid expanse of the Nubian desert. The Kushites did not simply cling to the river's edge. They mastered the art of living in both worlds, creating a kingdom that would eventually rise to challenge its legendary northern neighbor, Egypt. Their success was built on a sophisticated blend of strategic geography, cultural adaptation, and a crucial innovation that allowed them to push their influence beyond the river's immediate reach. For centuries, Kush existed in the long shadow of Egypt, a relationship defined by complex exchange. They were vital trading partners, sending south gold, ivory, ebony, and exotic animal skins up the Nile. In return, they absorbed Egyptian ideas about architecture, religion, and statecraft. This was not mere imitation, it was a selective adoption, a taking of useful tools and symbols which they would later reshape into something uniquely their own. The cultural flow was powerful, yet Kush always maintained a distinct Nubian identity, a separate language, and its own traditions. This balance allowed them to learn from a more powerful neighbor without being consumed by it, biding their time until the moment was right. That moment arrived during a period of instability in Egypt. In a stunning reversal of power, the armies of Kush marched north. Around 740 years before the Common Era, a Kushite king named Pi conquered a divided Egypt, establishing the 25th dynasty and ruling as pharaohs from their southern capital of Napata. For nearly a century, the kingdom of Kush was the master of the entire Nile Valley, a desert-powered kingdom now governing the fertile lands of its former teacher. This was the ultimate demonstration that a society born in a harsher, marginal environment could develop the resilience and martial skill to dominate a richer, but perhaps more fragmented, rival. Their strength, however, was always rooted in their ability to harness their own difficult landscape. While the Nile was their lifeline, the Kushites sought to extend their reach into the desert hinterlands to support agriculture and grazing away from the river's unpredictable floods. Their key innovation was the Hafir, a large, artificially constructed reservoir designed to capture and store seasonal rainwater. These were not small ponds, but massive, bowl-like excavations, sometimes lined with stone, that could hold millions of gallons of water. During the short, intense rainy season, runoff from the surrounding plains would be channeled into the Hafir, where it would be saved for the long, dry months. This technology unlocked the potential of the desert's fringes, allowing communities to cultivate sorghum, herd cattle, and settle areas that would otherwise be inaccessible for most of the year. The Hafir was more than a water hole. It was a tool of territorial control and economic expansion, enabling the Kushite state to project power and sustain populations beyond the Nile's narrow corridor. The legacy of Kush is etched into the Nubian landscape in the most iconic way imaginable: their own fields of pyramids. At sites like Meroe, dozens of steep-sided, distinctly Nubian pyramids mark the resting places of kings and queens. They stand as a bold statement of independence, a declaration that while they borrowed an architectural form, the culture that built them was proudly its own. The kingdom of Kush ultimately faded, its capital shifting and its power waning under pressure from new empires and perhaps environmental shifts, but its story completes a crucial pattern. It shows that desert and near-desert kingdoms were not isolated curiosities, but dynamic, competitive players on the ancient world stage. They could trade, learn, innovate, and when the opportunity arose, conquer. Their resilience was forged in scarcity, but their ambitions were boundless. So we are left with a landscape of ghosts, from the rock-cut wonders of Petra to the fossil water channels of the Garamantes and the desert pyramids of Kush. Each flourished for centuries, yet none endure as they once did. This leads us to the final, unifying question: what shared pressures did these remarkably adapted societies ultimately face that even their genius could not forever overcome? Stone and water provided the stage, but life itself was the performance. The true sustainability of a desert kingdom depended on a deep, intimate partnership with the living things uniquely equipped to thrive there. This was a form of biological engineering, a conscious selection and cultivation of the desert's own resilient flora and fauna. Their agricultural strategy was not to force foreign crops to grow, but to champion native survivors. The date palm stood as a towering symbol of this wisdom. More than just a source of sweet fruit, this tree was a vertical ecosystem. Its deep roots tapped hidden water, its fronds provided essential shade for other crops growing beneath it, and its trunk and leaves offered material for building and weaving. In its protective shadow, communities could cultivate hardy grains like barley and millet, which required far less water than wheat and could mature quickly in the short, cool growing seasons of desert oases. These crops formed the unshakable dietary backbone, transformed into bread, porridge, and beer, providing the caloric foundation for entire populations. This was a layered, efficient use of every drop, a food forest engineered for aridity. But the most transformative partnership was forged not with a plant, but with an animal. The single-humped dromedary camel was not merely a beast of burden. It was a biological revolution on 4 legs. Its domestication, which became widespread around 3,000 years ago, changed the desert's very geography. Camels could travel for over a week without water, carry immense loads across terrain that would break the wheels of carts, and provide nourishing milk, meat, and wool. They turned the vast, empty spaces between wells and oases from impassable barriers into navigable highways. With the camel, the scale of trade exploded. Caravans could now cross the deepest Sahara or the Arabian deserts in a single, continuous journey, linking continents with a reliability never before possible. For local transport and agricultural labor, the dependable donkey was the unsung hero, sturdy enough for short hauls and vital for turning the soil and grinding grain within the settled oasis communities. This careful selection of animals created a perfect logistical chain, the camel for the epic cross-desert journey, and the donkey for the final movement within the city gates. Beyond crops and livestock, these cultures possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of the native wild plants. The acacia tree, for instance, was a multi-purpose marvel. Its spreading canopy offered crucial shade in plazas and along roadways. Its pods provided fodder for animals, its hard wood was prized for tools and building, and its sap had medicinal uses. Every part of the local environment was understood to have a function. This was not a relationship of dominance, but of sophisticated integration. They did not see biodiversity as something to be cleared away, but as a vital toolkit to be carefully managed and utilized. By domesticating the camel and the donkey, and by cultivating drought-resistant palms and grains, these kingdoms effectively domesticated the desert's own biology, weaving themselves into the ecological fabric so completely that their survival and the thriving of these species became one and the same. The desert was not a barren stage for human activity. It was a living partner in a grand, centuries-long collaboration. Yet even the most perfect partnership faces tests from forces beyond its control, and the story of these kingdoms now turns toward the slow, gathering pressures that even their profound ingenuity could not forever hold at bay. The desert night sky was not a spectacle, it was a survival manual written in starlight. In a landscape devoid of landmarks where shifting sands erased trails with each passing wind, the heavens provided the only fixed reference points. For the caravan master guiding his precious goods or the farmer timing the planting of his last seeds, literacy in this celestial script was as essential as knowing how to find water. This was not abstract stargazing, it was a precise, practical science born from absolute necessity. The clear, dry air of the desert, free from the haze of humid climates, offered a crystal-clear view of the cosmos, turning the night into a vast, detailed map. Ancient navigators came to know the constellations not as myths but as waypoints. The steady rotation of the North Star, Polaris, provided an unwavering marker for true north, a constant in a world of disorienting sameness. By observing the rising and setting positions of other key stars and planets throughout the year, a skilled guide could plot a course across hundreds of miles of empty dunes with astonishing accuracy, leading his caravan from one hidden well to the next as reliably as a modern GPS. This knowledge was guarded trade secret, a form of intellectual capital that made certain families or guilds indispensable to the kingdom's economic lifeblood. But the stars governed more than just space, they also dictated time. The sun's journey across the sky and the subtle shift in where it rose and set over the seasons created a reliable calendar etched into the horizon. Observatories were not always grand buildings. Sometimes they were simple aligned stones or notches carved into a cliff face. These markers allowed priests and planners to pinpoint the solstices and equinoxes, the critical turning points of the year. This told them when the scant rains might arrive, when to plant crops that would mature in the brief cool season, and when to harvest. It also scheduled the rhythm of society itself, dictating the timing of major religious festivals, royal coronations, and trade fairs. These communal events, synchronized to the cosmos, unified the kingdom under a shared experience of time, reinforcing social bonds and divine order. Even the moon played its part. Its cycles illuminated the night for travel, offering a softer light than the glaring sun, and its phases provided a shorter, repeating calendar for market days or ritual observances. This deep celestial literacy meant that every clear night, the entire kingdom was literally on the same page, reading from the same cosmic text. Their world, so vast and empty by day, was intimately connected to an orderly, predictable universe by night. This harmony between earth and sky provided a profound psychological anchor, a sense that even in the most trackless waste, they were never truly lost. They were simply following a path the stars had laid down long before the first city was built. Yet this sophisticated understanding of the environment, from the stars above to the water below, existed within a delicate balance, one that could be upset by changes both within human control and far beyond it. The stars they navigated by have not changed, but the ground beneath our feet has finally begun to speak. For centuries, the legacy of these desert kingdoms was written in whispers, in scattered ruins and ancient texts. Today, a technological revolution is allowing us to hear their stories in full sentences for the very first time. We are no longer just observers of their monuments. We are becoming witnesses to their daily lives, thanks to a suite of tools that see through sand and stone. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses of energy deep into the earth, painting a ghostly image of foundations, streets, and entire city blocks still perfectly preserved beneath the dunes, like an X-ray of history itself. From the air, LIDAR technology uses laser pulses to strip away the modern vegetation, revealing the subtle contours of the land. With this view, the true genius of their landscape engineering becomes undeniable. What looks like a random wadi or dry riverbed to the naked eye is suddenly mapped as a carefully engineered canal system, a sprawling network of agricultural terraces, or the faint but precise track of a major trade route that connected oasis to oasis. These are not just discoveries of place, they are discoveries of scale and intention, proving these were planned, organized societies operating across vast territories. But the story does not end with maps of empty streets. The most intimate details emerge from what was left behind in the soil itself. Scientists now practice a form of microscopic archaeology, sifting through ancient trash heaps, storage rooms, and even the dust of old floors. Paleobotany, the study of ancient plant remains, uncovers tiny seeds, fragments of wood, and pollen grains that are thousands of years old. A single layer of soil can reveal a shift from drought-resistant barley to a more water-intensive grapevine, telling a story of a wetter period or a major investment in luxury goods. Zooarchaeology, the analysis of animal bones, tells us what was on the menu, from the remains of herd animals to fish bones traded from a distant river, painting a picture of a diverse diet and far-reaching economic connections. Even the chemistry of the soil holds clues, with isotopes in the sediment revealing periods of intense agriculture or sudden erosion. These silent witnesses, the seeds and bones and layers of earth, are transforming legends into hard data. We are moving from knowing that they built a city to understanding how they lived in it, what they ate for dinner, how their climate changed over generations, and what they traded with a neighbor 1,000 miles away. This flood of new evidence is doing more than filling in gaps. It is actively rewriting the historical narrative. For a long time, the dominant story of civilization was one that flowed from fertile river valleys outward, often portraying desert societies as peripheral, isolated, or simply less advanced. The emerging data shatters that assumption. The complex irrigation systems rivaled those of any contemporary civilization. The long-distance trade networks show a globalized mindset. The architectural adaptations demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of physics and material science. These were not primitive outposts. They were innovative core regions in their own right, hubs of technology and culture that shaped the ancient world as much as they were shaped by it. Every scan, every soil sample, and every mapped canal is a testament to their complexity, forcing us to redraw our mental maps of where and how human ingenuity truly flourished. This scientific detective work does not diminish their mystery. It deepens our awe, replacing romantic speculation with a profound respect for their tangible, engineered reality. And as we piece together the details of their thriving centuries, we are inevitably drawn to the most poignant question of all. What combination of forces could possibly cause such masterfully adapted societies to eventually fade from the very landscapes they had so brilliantly conquered? The silent data from seeds and soil points to a world in motion, not a static stage. The true context for these desert kingdoms is a climate that was never a fixed backdrop, but an active, changing character in their story. To understand their rise and their adaptations, we must first look beyond the desert we see today and into the deep climatic past, a field known as paleoclimatology. This science reads the Earth's own diary, found in layers of lakebed sediment, the chemistry of ancient ice cores, and the growth rings of long-buried trees. These natural archives reveal a stunning truth. The deserts that appear so eternal and unforgiving have actually pulsed with life over millennia, expanding and contracting with shifts in global weather patterns. The most dramatic example lies beneath the sands of the Sahara itself. For long periods ending roughly 5,000 years ago, this vast expanse was not a sea of dunes but a rolling savanna, a so-called green Sahara. Rock art from this era, discovered in places like the Tassili Ennaja Plateau in Algeria, depicts this lost world with breathtaking clarity, showing herds of giraffes, elephants, and hippopotamuses, and communities of people fishing in lakes and herding cattle. This was a fertile, habitable landscape where early human societies could settle and thrive without the extreme adaptations their descendants would later need. The kingdoms we have been exploring, like the Garamantes, often emerged in the long, slow aftermath of this green period, as the climate began its inexorable shift toward greater aridity. Their story, therefore, is not one of building in a permanent wasteland, but of brilliant, stubborn persistence in the face of a deteriorating environment. The rains were gradually retreating, the lakes were drying into salt flats, and the savanna was giving way to sand. In this light, their incredible engineering, the foggaras tapping fossil water, and the vast Hafir reservoirs capturing seasonal runoff, appear not just as innovations for survival, but as monumental holding actions against a changing world. They were leveraging the last gifts of a wetter past while inventing new ways to conserve every precious drop in a drier future. This climatic perspective makes their achievements profoundly more impressive. They were not simply adapting to a harsh but stable condition. They were navigating a slow-moving crisis, a generational challenge that required foresight and continuous adjustment. A society might perfect a water distribution system, only to find a century later that the aquifer it depended on was falling, forcing a new round of innovation or a difficult relocation. Their history becomes a masterclass in long-term resilience, a centuries-long dialogue with a partner that was slowly becoming more adversarial. This understanding reframes their eventual declines not as sudden collapses, but often as the culmination of a very long struggle, where a finally unsustainable combination of environmental pressure and perhaps social or economic strain tipped the balance. Their legacy, then, is a dual one, a testament to human ingenuity in harnessing a landscape, and a sobering lesson in the profound challenges of sustaining a civilization through deep climatic change. Even the most resilient societies exist within a fragile web of dependencies. The silence that eventually fell over these desert cities was not the result of a single cataclysm, but the slow unraveling of that web. To understand their decline is not to witness a failure of ingenuity, but to map the limits of adaptation itself. One of the most compelling theories points directly to the source of their life, their water. For civilizations like the Garamantes, their entire agricultural miracle was built on mining ancient fossil water, a treasure chest that was not being refilled. Centuries of drawing from these deep aquifers would have gradually lowered the water table, making their intricate foggara tunnels longer, more expensive to maintain, and ultimately less productive. As the yield diminished, the very foundation of their settled, farming-based society would have begun to crumble. The sand, always waiting, would have started to reclaim the fields first, then the outskirts of towns in a slow, relentless advance. This was a vulnerability written into their greatest success, a reminder that no resource, no matter how cleverly accessed, is truly infinite if it cannot be renewed. Yet environmental pressure alone rarely tells the whole story. A kingdom's wealth was its lifeblood, and that flow could be redirected by distant decisions. Consider the power of a changing trade map. For centuries, desert cities like Petra grew rich by controlling the land routes for incense, silk, and spices. But when the Roman Empire mastered monsoon winds and developed direct sea routes from the Red Sea to India, the economic landscape shifted fundamentally. Why would a merchant pay for protection, water, and tolls on a grueling 2-month overland journey when a ship could carry more goods faster and cheaper by sea? The slow diversion of this trade was like a tourniquet on the kingdom's economy. The caravans became smaller, less frequent, and the tariffs that funded public works, armies, and artistic patronage dwindled. A society built on being the indispensable crossroads found itself on a quieting road, its geopolitical relevance fading with each passing season. Often, these strains converged into a perfect storm. Political instability or conflict at the edges of an empire could disrupt the delicate security that long-distance trade required. External pressures from growing neighboring powers could demand costly defenses or lead to conflict, further draining resources. Meanwhile, paleoclimate data suggests periods of accelerated aridity, where even the most sophisticated water conservation systems might be overwhelmed by a prolonged drought that lasted not for years but for decades. In such a scenario, a lowered water table from overuse, a shrinking economy from lost trade, and a severe climatic downturn could intersect, creating a crisis that no single adaptation could solve. The social contract, so strong in times of plenty, could fray under the stress of scarcity, leading to difficult choices about relocation or a return to a more nomadic way of life. Analyzing their decline, therefore, shifts our perspective from marveling at their peak to respecting their entire arc. It highlights that resilience is not a permanent state, but a continuous negotiation with a changing world. Their stories end not with a verdict of defeat, but with a profound lesson about balance, about the long-term consequences of our most brilliant solutions, and about the humility required to thrive in a world that is always subtly changing around us. The story of civilization has often been told as a gift from the rivers. We learn of ancient Egypt cradled by the predictable, life-giving floods of the Nile, its agricultural calendar set by the rhythm of the water. We study Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, where irrigation canals turned the Fertile Crescent into a breadbasket of the ancient world. These river valley models present a powerful, almost logical narrative. Abundance of water leads to surplus food, which allows for specialization, hierarchy, and monumental architecture. It is a story of growth fueled by natural bounty. But this familiar narrative creates a shadow, subtly implying that civilizations born in plenty are the standard, the primary blueprint for human advancement. The desert kingdoms force us to rewrite that script entirely. They present not a deviation from the norm, but a parallel, equally brilliant path forged under opposite conditions. Where the river valley had abundance, the desert had scarcity, and from that scarcity sprang a completely different set of innovations. The contrast is not about which was better, but about how profoundly environment shapes destiny. The river gave its gifts freely, but it also demanded management of floods and the complex politics of distributing fertile silt. The desert gave nothing freely, it demanded payment in ingenuity. Every drop of water had to be captured, conserved, and allocated with legal precision. This fundamental difference in starting point created distinct societal fingerprints. While Egypt's pharaohs derived power from their divine connection to the Nile cycle, a desert king's legitimacy often rested on his practical guarantee of water security and safe trade routes. His power was not just spiritual, it was infrastructural. The economic engines differed dramatically. River valley wealth was often built from the soil upwards, from agricultural surplus that could feed a non-farming elite. Desert kingdom wealth was built from the space in between, from the taxes and services levied on the movement of goods across that empty space. They were masters of logistics and tariffs, not just harvests. Their monumental architecture reflects this too. In Egypt, you build upward with the abundant mud brick and stone near the river, creating pyramids that reach for the sky. In Petra, you build inward, carving your grandeur from the cliff itself, using the landscape as both quarry and fortress. This speaks to another key distinction: defensive geography. A river valley, for all its fertility, is often an open, inviting plain, requiring standing armies and fortified borders to protect its wealth. A desert kingdom, by its very nature, came with built-in defenses. The harsh, waterless approach was its first wall, the narrow canyon its gate. This allowed societies with smaller populations to wield influence and protect riches disproportionate to their size. Ultimately, this comparison does something vital. It liberates our understanding of human potential from a single map. The river valley model shows us how humans harness abundance to build stability. The desert kingdom model shows us how humans engineer survival into prosperity by mastering scarcity, trade, and isolation. One is not a precursor to the other. They are sibling strategies for civilization. Recognizing this elevates the Garamantes, the Nabateans, and the Kushites from footnotes in someone else's story to authors of their own epic. They were not waiting for a river to civilize them. They were writing a different book on how to build a world, one where the most valuable resource was not water, but the brilliant, adaptive human mind. This realization about parallel paths leads us to a final, pressing thought. If these ancient societies hold such powerful lessons in resilience, what do their silent, sand-swept ruins have to say to our own world today? Their silent stone holds more than the shape of a city. It holds the sound of a language. While the architecture shows us what they built, the written word tells us who they were. Scratched into cliff faces, carved on tomb entrances, and stamped onto clay seals, the inscriptions left by these desert kingdoms are their direct, unedited voices calling across the centuries. This is not second-hand history, it is a first-hand account, a priceless layer of narrative that turns speculation into understanding. Take the very script you are reading now, the flowing letters of the Arabic alphabet. Its elegant ancestor was the Nabatean script, developed by the merchants and administrators of Petra. They adapted the Aramaic alphabet to suit their needs, streamlining the characters for faster writing on papyrus and stone, a script born from the practical demands of commerce and governance. Over time, this script evolved, its curves and connections gradually transforming into the classical Arabic that would later carry the words of an empire and a faith across the world. In this lineage, we see a desert kingdom's bureaucratic innovation becoming a cornerstone of global culture, a testament to how practical tools can have unimaginably long legacies. Yet not all these voices speak so clearly to us today. In the kingdom of Kush, at sites like Meroe, scholars face a captivating puzzle: the Meroitic script. This writing system, used for several centuries, comes in two forms, one derived from Egyptian hieroglyphs for monumental inscriptions, and a cursive form for everyday use. We can sound out the words, we know the alphabet, but the language itself remains largely a mystery, only partially deciphered. It is like having a beautifully written letter in a code we have almost cracked. The individual symbols are clear, but their full meaning dances just out of reach. This undeciphered script is a haunting reminder of how much history is still silent, waiting for a linguistic key to unlock the personal thoughts, market prices, and royal decrees of a mighty African empire. Where we can read them, these inscriptions transform anonymous ruins into a society of individuals with clear intentions. A tomb inscription does more than mark a resting place. It announces lineage, achievements, and piety, showing what a culture valued enough to etch in stone for eternity. We learn of laws governing water rights carved for all to see, proving that fair distribution was the non-negotiable foundation of the social contract. Religious dedications to gods with names like Sahara in Petra or Aphrodite in Kush reveal a divine landscape, showing how people explained their world and sought protection in it. Even simple marks on trade goods, like a seal identifying a merchant or a notation of weight, pull back the curtain on the day-to-day mechanics of an economy that spanned continents. These are not the grand narratives of kings written by later historians. They are the contemporaneous records of diplomacy, faith, commerce, and identity. They tell us what people were proud of, what they argued about, and what they feared. A single line about a treaty with Rome or a conflict with a desert tribe adds a geopolitical dimension to the pottery shards and foundation stones. This epigraphic evidence, the study of inscriptions, allows us to move beyond wondering what a building was for, to hearing the people who used it explain it in their own words. It adds the rich layer of motive and meaning to the physical evidence, completing a picture where we see not just a clever society, but a conscious one, actively writing its own story into the very fabric of the desert. And if their words tell us so much about how they lived, what might the objects they held most dear reveal about the values they cherished and the connections they nurtured across the vast and empty sands? The inscriptions tell us what they wrote, but to understand what they believed, we must listen to the desert wind. In a world where the sun could scorch and the rains could fail for years, the forces of nature were not abstract concepts. They were direct, personal powers with the ability to grant life or deliver ruin. It was only natural, then, for the spiritual landscape of these kingdoms to become a profound mirror of their physical one. Their gods and goddesses were often personifications of the very elements they struggled to master. A deity of the thunderstorm was not a distant figure, but the literal bringer of the rare, life-giving downpour. A god of the earth was the holder of underground springs. This was a theology born from necessity, where worship was intimately tied to the mechanics of survival. To pray for rain was to engage in the most vital form of economic planning, and to honor the sun was to acknowledge the dominant power in their sky. This fusion created a powerful feedback loop, where religious duty and practical necessity became one and the same. Rituals were not merely symbolic, they often encoded crucial, practical knowledge about the environment. A seasonal festival marking a god's journey might perfectly align with the time to clear irrigation canals before the expected rains. A pilgrimage to a sacred mountain peak could retrace the path to a hidden spring, ensuring that each generation learned the location of this vital resource through sacred story and footsteps. The ceremonies themselves required communal participation, reinforcing the cooperation needed to maintain water systems or organize caravans. In this way, faith became the vessel that carried essential survival instructions across generations, wrapped in the compelling power of myth and tradition. The placement of sacred sites made this connection visible. Temples and shrines were most commonly built at oases, the source of all life, or atop prominent mountains and mesas, places that touched the sky where rain clouds formed. This anchored their spiritual map directly onto their physical world. A traveler did not just find a temple at an oasis. He found that the oasis existed because of the temple, because a deity had willed it so. This provided a cosmological explanation for their harsh reality, one that offered meaning and hope. It transformed a struggle for water from a random hardship into a sacred test or a divine covenant. Such a belief system did more than explain the world, it actively strengthened the social order. If the king was the high priest or a descendant of the rain god, his authority to allocate water and lead the community was not just political, it was divinely ordained. This moral framework justified the rules, the hierarchies, and the collective sacrifices required for the kingdom to endure. In the face of a drought, faith provided a narrative of perseverance, a story that the gods were testing their devotion and that faithfulness would eventually be rewarded. This shared belief forged incredibly strong communal bonds, uniting people under a common purpose that transcended individual hardship. Their resilience was therefore not just engineered in stone and water, it was nurtured in temple courtyards and around ritual fires, fortified by a conviction that their struggle in the desert was part of a larger sacred order. This profound intertwining of belief and survival hints at a final, powerful legacy, one that moves beyond ruins and scriptures to ask what these ancient masters of scarcity can still teach us in a modern world facing its own profound environmental pressures. A desert is not just a landscape, it is a fortress. For the kingdoms that called it home, the vast, waterless expanse was their greatest defensive asset, a natural moat more effective than any wall. Imagine an invading army, accustomed to the fertile fields and predictable logistics of a river valley, looking across the endless dunes or sheer canyon walls. Their first and most formidable enemy was not a soldier, but the environment itself. Without the deep, generational knowledge of where the hidden wells lay, without the stamina to cross hundreds of miles under a relentless sun, and without the camels that made such travel possible, a large force would simply perish before a single battle could be joined. This geographical reality provided a security that was both free and absolute, allowing these societies to focus their ingenuity and resources on flourishing rather than on constant, large-scale warfare. They did not just settle in the desert, they positioned themselves within its most defensible features with brilliant intentionality. The Nabateans did not build Petra on an open plain. They placed it at the end of a narrow, twisting gorge, the Sick, that could be defended by a handful of determined guards. The Garamantes built their hilltop fortresses or castles on rocky outcrops that dominated the surrounding plains, giving them early warning of any approach. Cities across these regions were consistently situated on high plateaus within deep canyons or atop mesas, locations where the terrain itself broke the momentum of an attack and funneled enemies into easily controlled choke points. This strategic positioning meant that the very act of reaching their heartlands was a victory in itself, one that few potential conquerors could achieve. Their military strategy reflected this defensive geography perfectly. Instead of investing in vast, expensive standing armies of infantry, which required enormous supplies of food and water, these kingdoms developed forces built for mobility and control of space. The backbone of their power was the camel corps, mounted on animals that could endure the conditions that would break a horse. These mobile units were masters of the vast emptiness. Their role was not to hold fixed lines, but to patrol the incredibly long trade routes that were the source of their wealth, to secure oases, and to launch swift, punishing raids against rivals or raiders who threatened their economic lifelines. They could appear as if from the desert itself, strike, and vanish back into the dunes, a tactic that made them formidable opponents even to organized empires like Rome. This focus on a lean, specialized military had a profound economic benefit. It conserved vital resources. The grain and water that would have been consumed by a large garrison of foot soldiers could instead support artisans, merchants, and farmers. The wealth from trade did not need to be poured endlessly into armories and barracks, but could be channeled into monumental architecture, public waterworks, and cultural patronage. Their security model was one of efficiency, using the desert as a passive, encompassing shield and a small, highly adapted force as its active guardian. This allowed them to protect immense riches and complex societies with a military footprint that was surprisingly light, proving that true power in the desert lay not in the size of an army, but in the depth of one's knowledge and the cleverness of one's position. The same hands that engineered aqueducts and charted the stars also held the chisels and brushes that defined a civilization's soul. To assume that a life of material constraint would stifle artistic expression is to misunderstand the human spirit entirely. For these desert kingdoms, the creation of beauty was not a luxury reserved for times of plenty. It was a fundamental declaration of identity, a way to assert their sophistication and permanence in a landscape that seemed to whisper of impermanence. Their art did not imitate the lush, flowing styles of fertile river valleys. Instead, it developed a powerful visual language born directly from the austerity and resources of their home. This cultural production stands as the ultimate proof that their flourishing was holistic, encompassing not just survival, but the profound human need for meaning and splendor. Consider the most iconic canvas of all, the cliff faces of Petra. Here, artistry was an act of monumental subtraction. The famous treasury, or Al-Kosne, is not a building that was constructed, but a mountain that was revealed. Craftsmen worked from the top down, carving the intricate Corinthian columns, statues, and pediments directly into the rose-red sandstone, a process that required not just artistic vision, but an intimate understanding of the stone's geology to avoid catastrophic fractures. The resulting facades are a breathtaking fusion of Hellenistic style and Nabatean sensibility, their warm, swirling hues changing with the angle of the sun, making the rock itself seem alive. This was architecture as sculpture, where the local material was not a limitation, but the very source of the artwork's majesty. Far to the south, in the kingdom of Kush, a different palette told a different story. The pyramids at Meroe, with their steep, sharp angles, are striking from the outside, but step inside their offering chapels, and you enter a world of vivid color. The walls are adorned with vibrant frescoes depicting kings and queens in powerful poses, receiving life from the gods. The pigments for these paintings were miracles of local innovation. Artists sourced brilliant yellows and reds from iron-rich ochres found in the desert hills, deep blues from precious minerals traded across long distances, and blacks from charcoal. They ground these materials into powder and bound them with plant gums or egg whites, creating a durable art that has survived for millennia. The motifs themselves are a rich tapestry of influence and local pride. You see the striding lion god Apodamak, a uniquely Kushite deity, depicted with a fierce, localized power. Alongside him might be the Egyptian god Ammon, but rendered with distinct Nubian features, a conscious act of cultural borrowing and reshaping. Scenes of lush grapevines and palm trees, painted in the heart of the desert, speak of idealized abundance and divine favor, while detailed depictions of jewelry, furniture, and ceremonial objects broadcast the wealth and status of the elite buried within. Even in smaller, everyday objects, this distinctive aesthetic shone through. Pottery from the Garamantes, though made from the local clay, was often decorated with graceful geometric patterns inspired by woven textiles or the patterns of the desert floor. Jewelry crafted from desert gold and carnelian bore designs of local animals like gazelles or ostriches, linking the wearer to the ecology of their world. This artistic output served multiple vital purposes. It was a public display of power and piety, meant to awe subjects and honor the gods. It was a carrier of cultural memory, preserving myths and royal lineages. But perhaps most importantly, it was a way to transform the raw, harsh materials of their environment, stone, mineral, clay, into objects of refined beauty and complex thought. They proved that innovation within constraint can produce styles of breathtaking originality. Their art was the signature on their civilization, a bold, colorful, and enduring statement that in the silence of the desert, they did not just live, they created, they dreamed, and they defined what beauty could be. Beyond the grand facades and royal tombs, the true rhythm of these kingdoms was measured in the quiet, repetitive tasks of daily life. For every king who commissioned a pyramid, there were thousands of hands that shaped its bricks, carried its water, and grew its food. To see these civilizations in full, we must step down from the monuments and into the dust of the ordinary street, into the world of the farmer, the potter, the merchant, and the parent. Their story is not written in stone inscriptions, but in the subtle archaeology of the home, the discarded pottery shard, the worn grinding stone, and the layout of a simple dwelling. This ground-level view reveals the human engine that powered the kingdom's marvels, a world of ingenious routine built upon shared effort. The day began as it always did, with water. In a royal palace, this might mean servants drawing from a vast cistern, but in a common household, it was a precise and careful ritual. Every family had its storage jars, large ceramic vessels sealed to prevent evaporation, often set into cool, shaded corners of the home. The matriarch or eldest child would be tasked with the daily allocation, measuring out just enough for drinking, cooking, and perhaps a small amount for washing. Not a drop was wasted. Leftover water from cooking might be used to moisten clay for pottery or to water a precious household herb garden in a shaded courtyard. This constant, intimate management of their most vital resource was the foundational chore of existence, a lesson learned from earliest childhood. From water, the focus turned to food. The diet was a masterpiece of making much from little, relying on the resilient staples the desert provided. The centerpiece was grain, barley or millet, which was ground daily on a heavy basalt quern stone. The rhythmic sound of grinding was the soundtrack of the morning, performed almost always by women. This flour was then mixed with water and baked into flatbreads on hot clay griddles or in communal ovens. Protein came from lentils and beans, which could be stored for years, and from the occasional piece of goat or mutton, a luxury often reserved for festivals. The humble date was a powerhouse of nutrition, eaten fresh, dried for travel, or pressed into a sweet syrup. Meals were simple, hearty, and designed for sustenance, flavored with native herbs like cumin or coriander that could be grown with minimal water. Yet even within this constraint, there was variety and care, as evidenced by clay cooking pots found with residues of stews and fermented drinks. The artistry of survival extended into craft. What a society makes for itself speaks volumes about its values and its connection to place. The desert provided the raw materials, and human skill transformed them. Potters used local clay to coil and fire the essential storage jars, cooking pots, and lamps, often decorating them with simple, pressed designs. Weavers worked at vertical looms, spinning wool from their herds or flax traded from the river valleys into sturdy textiles for clothing, tents, and sacks. A carpenter might fashion tools' handles from acacia wood, while a metalsmith, working in a small, ventilated workshop, recycled precious copper or iron to make farming tools, simple jewelry, and repair parts. This was not mass production, but a community-based economy of skilled artisans, where a potter's distinctive stamp or a weaver's favorite pattern created a sense of local identity and quality. Social life was woven into this daily work. While clear hierarchies existed, with elites and priests at the top, the society functioned because of deep networks of cooperation and kinship. Extended families often lived in connected dwellings, sharing courtyards and resources. Children learned trades from their parents, and elders held the respected role of remembering family lineages and the old stories that contained survival wisdom. Leisure, though scarce in a labor-intensive world, was found in communal spaces. Evenings might bring storytelling under the stars, the sharing of a simple meal with neighbors, or music from a simple flute or drum during a local festival that marked a seasonal change or a religious observance. These moments of connection reinforced the bonds that made collective life in a harsh environment not just possible but meaningful. The true monument to these kingdoms, then, is not only the temple on the hill, but the accumulated wisdom of a million daily acts, the careful rationing of water, the shared heat of an oven, the skill of a steady hand at the loom. It was this granular, persistent ingenuity of ordinary people that translated the grand adaptations of kings and engineers into a lived, sustainable reality, generation after generation. Their legacy is a reminder that history is built as much from the quiet rhythm of the quern stone as from the proclamation of a royal decree. The lines on a modern map often feel permanent, the sharp borders of nations drawn with the certainty of a ruler. Yet beneath those contemporary boundaries, the faint, ancient tracks of trade caravans still whisper their influence. The very shape of regional politics and infrastructure today can be traced back to the economic logic of those desert kingdoms. Major highways across North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula frequently follow the precise paths of the old incense road or trans-Saharan routes because the geography of survival has not changed. A modern truck stop offering fuel and rest stands where a caravanserai once provided water and security, the logic of the journey preserved across millennia. Even political borders, those seemingly arbitrary lines in the sand, sometimes echo the old spheres of influence around crucial oasis networks or mountain passes that were worth controlling then and remain strategically vital now. The long shadow of these civilizations is cast not in ruin alone, but in the living geography of connection and power. This enduring influence extends beyond asphalt and border posts into the realm of urgent, modern problem-solving. Faced with the escalating challenges of climate change and water scarcity, contemporary engineers and architects are looking backward with newfound respect. The sophisticated passive cooling principles of the windcatcher are being studied for integration into green building designs, offering energy-free temperature regulation. The concept of the Kanat and the Hafir, capturing and conserving every precious drop, is inspiring revolutionary approaches to sustainable agriculture in arid regions, moving away from water-intensive methods toward clever, ancient conservation. Researchers are actively relearning what these cultures knew intrinsically, that working with a harsh environment is smarter than fighting against it with unsustainable technology. This revival of ancient wisdom is a powerful testament to the sophistication embedded in their everyday survival, proving their innovations were not just for their time, but for the future as well. Perhaps the most profound legacy, however, is not in stone or water lore, but in the living breath of culture. Among the descendant communities in these regions, threads of continuity are woven tightly into the social fabric. Linguistic echoes persist, with place names and local dialects preserving words from languages spoken 1,000 years ago. Craft traditions showcase an unbroken line of knowledge, whether geometric patterns woven into a rug or etched onto pottery can be linked directly to artistic motifs found in archaeological digs, a visual language passed hand to hand through countless generations. Even certain social structures, like the importance of extended family networks and communal decision-making for resource management, reflect adaptations forged in the crucible of desert life. These are not mere relics, they are active, living components of identity. The story of these kingdoms does not end with their decline, it simply changes form. Their legacy is a palimpsest, a parchment where ancient writing shows through beneath the modern text. It is present in the road you might drive on, the sustainable design of a new building, the pattern in a market tapestry, and the collective memory of a community that still understands the value of a shared water source. They teach us that civilization is not a single, fleeting event, but a continuous conversation between people and place, where the most brilliant solutions can echo for centuries, waiting for a future generation to listen and understand their value once more. The past is not a sealed tomb, but an open blueprint. The challenges that define the desert kingdoms, water scarcity, economic uncertainty in harsh lands, the creeping advance of dry earth, are not relics. They are the pressing headlines of today for billions living in the world's arid and semi-arid regions. The solutions etched into their stone and law offer more than historical intrigue. They provide a compelling alternative script for modern development, one written in the language of resilience rather than relentless extraction. Consider the escalating crisis of desertification, where fertile land degrades into barren ground. Modern responses often involve massive, centralized infrastructure, like drilling ever deeper wells or constructing sprawling pipelines that move water from distant, often depleted sources. The ancient model suggests a different path, one of decentralized, localized capture. Instead of focusing solely on grand schemes, there is powerful wisdom in reviving the principle of the Hafir or the foggaras, in creating thousands of small-scale interventions that catch seasonal rainfall where it falls. This could mean modernized versions of contour trenching on hillsides to slow runoff, or networks of micro-catchments that replenish local groundwater. It is a strategy that works with the landscape's own rhythm, building resilience from the ground up, community by community, mimicking the very systems that sustained civilizations for centuries. Their economic logic holds a transformative lesson for regional development today. Many arid nations feel pressured to build their futures on the extraction of a single finite resource, whether it is oil, minerals, or fossil water for thirsty agriculture. This creates boom and bust cycles and often leaves local communities marginalized. The desert kingdoms prospered by creating value from movement and knowledge, not just from what lay in the ground. They became indispensable service hubs providing security, logistics, and fair markets. A modern parallel might see arid regions investing not in exporting raw materials alone, but in becoming centers for renewable energy innovation, for sustainable desert agriculture technology, or for expertise in water management and ecological restoration. Their wealth would stem from the intellectual capital and services they provide to a world grappling with drought, turning their historical challenge into a contemporary competitive advantage. This shift in perspective requires embracing their most profound legacy, a long-term mindset. These societies planned in generations, not election cycles. Their greatest projects, like a qanat stretching for miles, were investments that would only fully benefit their grandchildren. This stands in stark contrast to the short-term exploitation that drives the overpumping of aquifers and the degradation of marginal soils today. For policymakers and engineers, these kingdoms are not just archaeological sites, they are historical case studies in adaptive management. They demonstrate how legal frameworks for water sharing can prevent conflict, how social cohesion is the bedrock of environmental stewardship, and how cultural identity can be a powerful motivator for sustaining a difficult but cherished way of life. The silent stones of Petra and the faint lines of Garamantes fields are asking us a direct question. Will we continue to see arid lands as problems to be solved with brute force technology? Or will we learn to see them as the desert kingdoms did, as landscapes of subtle opportunity demanding patience, cleverness, and a deep respect for the delicate balance between human ambition and enduring limits of a dry earth? The same desert silence that preserved these ruins for centuries is now broken by a new sound, the footsteps of visitors from every corner of the globe. The modern fate of a place like Petra or the pyramids of Meroe is to exist as both an archaeological treasure and a major tourist destination, a dual identity that creates a profound and necessary tension. On one hand, the physical presence of thousands of visitors each day introduces a slow, invisible strain. The very act of walking through the ancient sick in Petra, of touching a carved wall, or even the collective humidity of breath in a sealed tomb contributes to gradual erosion. These sites are not just stone, they are fragile, non-renewable records. Every grain of sand worn away by a sneaker sole carries with it a microscopic piece of the story, a permanent loss measured in millimeters per year. The economic reality, however, paints a different picture. For the nations that steward these legacies, tourism is often a vital source of income and global connection. The revenue from entry fees and local services funds not only ongoing preservation work, but also supports communities living near these sites. It creates jobs for guides, artisans, and hospitality workers, weaving the ancient past into the economic fabric of the present. Perhaps more importantly, it fosters a global awareness. A person who has stood in the shadow of the treasury or walked the streets of a Garamantes settlement becomes a lifelong ambassador for that history, carrying forward a personal connection that no textbook can provide. This creates a central ethical question for our time. How do we balance the public's right to experience wonder with our duty to protect the source of that wonder for the centuries to come? A promising answer is emerging not from restricting access but from redefining it. Digital archaeology and virtual reconstruction are opening a revolutionary third path. Using high-resolution 3D scanning, drone photography, and advanced software, teams are creating immaculate digital twins of entire sites. These virtual models allow anyone with an internet connection to explore a tomb from every angle, to see frescoes in their original vibrant colors as they appeared 2,000 years ago, or to witness a digital reconstruction of how a complex water system functioned. This technology does more than offer an alternative for those who cannot travel. It becomes a powerful preservation tool. Scholars can study minute architectural details without causing wear, and conservators can monitor cracks or erosion with pixel-perfect precision over time. Virtual tourism can help manage physical foot traffic by offering deep, educational experiences that might complement a shorter, more carefully managed in-person visit. It raises the level of engagement from a simple photograph to an interactive learning journey. These tools also grapple with deeper questions of ownership and narrative. Who gets to tell the story of these places? Digital platforms can host multiple voices, from academic archaeologists to the oral histories of descendant communities, creating a richer, more layered understanding than any single guidebook could provide. The goal is no longer just to bring people to the site, but to bring the site, in all its complexity and context, to the people. This shift represents the latest chapter in humanity's relationship with these landscapes. We are moving from explorers and conquerors to stewards and interpreters. The challenge is to use our modern tools not to dominate these ancient spaces, but to listen to them more carefully, to preserve their physical truth while expanding their story for a global audience. The silent stones have survived empires and climate shifts, and now they must survive our admiration. Our task is to ensure that our curiosity today does not rob future generations of their own chance to stand in awe and hear the echoes of a desert kingdom's genius whispering on the wind. The ruins speak in fragments, and for every answer uncovered, a deeper question takes its place. We have mapped their water channels and translated their inscriptions, yet the final chapters of these desert kingdoms remain tantalizingly incomplete, their conclusions blurred like a distant horizon in the heat haze. This is where the story transforms from a recounting of the past into a live investigation, with archaeologists, historians, and scientists working as detectives on some of history's most captivating cold cases. Consider the majestic silence of Petra's city center. We know the Nabateans thrived there for centuries, but the precise reasons for the eventual abandonment of its urban core are still debated. Was it the cumulative effect of that shifting trade map, as sea routes permanently drained its economic lifeblood? Could a series of catastrophic earthquakes, evidenced by damaged structures, have shattered the infrastructure beyond the will or means to repair? Or did a slow, relentless environmental change, a deepening drought that even their brilliant hydrology could not counter, finally persuade the remaining population to leave? Each theory has its proponents, and each new season of excavation sifts through the dust of the later layers, searching for the subtle clues that might tip the scale. Far across the sea of sand, the legacy of the Garamantes is literally buried. Satellite surveys suggest that thousands of their settlements and field systems may still lie completely undiscovered beneath the Saharan dunes. Each potential site is a time capsule promising untouched insights into their daily life, their trade goods, and perhaps the very timeline of their decline. Modern technology is the key, with researchers using advanced radar and magnetic sensors to scan these vast areas, creating subsurface maps that highlight anomalies, shapes that do not belong to nature. Every promising signature on those maps represents a potential dig site, a chance to pull another piece of their civilization back into the light and understand the true scale of their once green realm. The collapse of the kingdom of Kush presents its own complex puzzle. We see a gradual shift of power centers southward, a weakening of centralized authority, and eventually a fading from the historical record of the great powers. But was the primary driver environmental, with the Nile's flow patterns changing or the hinterlands becoming too dry even for their Hafir systems? Could it have been mounting political and military pressure from the rising power of Axum to the east, disrupting trade and demanding costly wars? Or was it a slow unraveling from within, as the social contract strained under the weight of these combined challenges? There is likely no single villain in this story, but a tangled web of factors that researchers are still patiently disentangling. This is not passive scholarship, it is an active frontier. Interdisciplinary teams now bring together climatologists who analyze ancient pollen cores, economists who model trade networks, and epigraphers struggling to crack the final code of the Meroitic script. Every summer, new field missions descend into these deserts, not with a sense of finality, but with a spirit of open-ended inquiry. They are not just digging for artifacts, they are collecting data points for a grand, ongoing experiment in understanding human resilience. Each pottery shard, each soil sample, each laser scan from a drone is fed into a growing digital corpus, allowing for patterns to emerge that were invisible to earlier generations of researchers. This dynamic, unfinished quality is what makes this history so profoundly alive. It means that the map of our understanding is still being drawn, that a discovery made next year could fundamentally rewrite a paragraph we thought was settled. The story of these desert kingdoms is not a eulogy for what was lost, it is an invitation. It invites us to watch over the shoulders of those on the cutting edge, to appreciate that our knowledge is a living, breathing entity, always expanding, always questioning. The silence of the ruins is not an ending but a pause, waiting for the next question to be asked and for the next layer of sand to be carefully brushed away. The story of these kingdoms is not a mystery of evidence but a puzzle of perception. For generations, our grand narratives of ancient civilization were drawn on a very specific map, one centered firmly on the Mediterranean and the so-called Fertile Crescent. Egypt, Greece, Rome, Mesopotamia, these were the stars in our historical constellation, their stories told and retold as the definitive blueprint for human advancement. In this telling, the desert was often cast as the empty stage for their dramas, a barren backdrop against which the real story unfolded. But as we have seen, that stage was itself filled with brilliant actors running complex societies for centuries. So why were their scripts so often left out of the main performance? The first reason lies in the very nature of historical evidence and who was most diligent in preserving it. The classical civilizations of Greece and Rome were prolific producers of written records, histories, plays, legal codes, and letters that survived on durable papyrus and parchment. Their voices, in their own words, echoed loudly down through the ages, directly shaping the Western historical tradition. In contrast, many desert societies, while they did right, often used materials less likely to endure millennia in the open air, like leather or palm leaves, or their inscriptions, like the Meroitic script, remain only partially understood. When your primary historical sources are written by outsiders, like a Roman historian commenting on a desert tribe he saw as a distant trading partner or a military foe, the perspective is inherently limited and often biased. The rich internal view of the society, its self-perception, its daily laws, its poetry, can be lost, making it harder for later historians to reconstruct a full and sympathetic portrait. This creates a feedback loop where the civilizations that wrote the most history, in languages later scholars could easily read, came to dominate the story. Physical inaccessibility played a powerful role as well. For centuries, the ruins of Petra were known only to local Bedouin tribes, a whispered legend in the West. The Garamantes cities lay buried under the shifting Sahara, invisible to all but the most intrepid explorers. Meanwhile, the Parthenon stood in plain sight in Athens, and the pyramids of Giza were never lost. The monuments of the Mediterranean were simply easier for European scholars, the architects of modern historical study, to visit, study, and claim as their own intellectual heritage. This geographical accident reinforced the idea that the center of the ancient world's gravity was always there by that sea, and not deep within a desert wadi or atop a Nubian plateau. There is also a subtler, more profound bias at work, a bias toward a certain kind of environment. The narrative of progress was long tied to a very specific model, the river valley. The story went that abundant water led to agricultural surplus, which allowed for specialization, cities, and writing. This model, based on the Nile, Tigris, and Euphrates, became the textbook definition of how civilization begins. Desert kingdoms, which flourished through scarcity, trade, and astonishing engineering, did not fit this neat template. Their success seemed like an exception, an anomaly to be noted in a sidebar, rather than a parallel, equally valid pathway to complexity. Their brilliance was measured against the wrong yardstick, making them seem like clever survivors rather than innovative founders. This marginalization has real consequences. It shrinks our understanding of human potential, suggesting that ingenuity only flowers under conventionally favorable conditions. It severs the cultural and economic connections that we now know linked the Sahara to the Mediterranean, Nubia to the Pharaohs, and Petra to empires from Rome to India, presenting these regions as isolated backwaters instead of networked hubs. Most importantly, it silences the voices and diminishes the achievements of entire cultures whose descendants still live in those lands. To rediscover these kingdoms is to actively rewrite a more honest and inclusive global history. It is to acknowledge that civilization is not a single river flowing from one source, but a vast delta fed by countless streams, each finding its own way to the sea. The desert did not produce lesser civilizations, it produced different ones, and in their difference lies a lesson we desperately need, that human creativity is most dazzling not when resources are given, but when they are ingeniously made. Their legacy forces us to ask a fundamental question about ourselves. What does it truly mean to be resourceful? For centuries, we have measured the potential of a society by the natural wealth it was given, by the rivers that flooded its fields or the forests that shaded its soil. The desert kingdoms invert that entire equation. They stand as monumental proof that civilization is not a gift of geography, but a product of the human mind. Their most vital resource was not water or fertile land, it was creativity itself. When the environment offered little, they responded not with resignation, but with invention. They looked at a barren cliff and saw a palace, at a dry riverbed and saw a reservoir, at a trackless dune sea and saw a highway. this reframes our entire understanding of human potential. It suggests that our greatest leaps forward may not come from places of comfort and plenty, but from the necessity born of constraint. The pressure to adapt, to cooperate, to think differently, can forge societies of astonishing sophistication and resilience. Their history is a powerful argument against a deterministic view of our world, the idea that our environment writes our destiny in stone. The desert did not dictate a story of poverty and struggle for them. It presented a set of extreme conditions to which they authored a spectacular response. They chose to see the harsh landscape not as a prison, but as a partner in a grand, centuries-long project of co-creation. This perspective carries a profound philosophical weight for us today. We all face our own deserts, our own landscapes of apparent scarcity. These might be personal challenges that feel insurmountable, professional environments that seem stagnant, or communities grappling with limited opportunities. The lesson of the rock-cut cities and the fossil water channels is not that we should seek out hardship, but that within the constraints we are given, there exists a space for radical ingenuity. Our modern world often equates progress with the consumption of more resources, with building bigger, extracting faster, and moving on when a place is depleted. These ancient cultures offer a different model, one of deep listening and careful investment. They teach us that sustainability is not a modern buzzword, but an ancient, non-negotiable principle for long-term survival. It is the understanding that every system has a balance, and that our cleverest solutions must work within that balance, not against it. Their cooperative social structures remind us that resilience is rarely a solo endeavor. The Kanat was not dug by one person, and the caravan was not protected by one guard. Their flourishing was a collective achievement, built on shared rules, mutual dependence, and a cultural identity strong enough to bind people together through generations of challenge. This invites a moment of quiet reflection. Look at the metaphorical deserts in your own life or in our shared world. Where do we see only lack, where a Nabatean engineer might see hidden potential? Where are we trying to fight our environment with brute force, where a Garamantes farmer might instead work with its rhythms? And perhaps most importantly, how can we rebuild the social and cooperative frameworks that turn individual cleverness into lasting, communal strength? The silent stones of these kingdoms do not just tell a story about the past, they issue a quiet challenge for the future. They ask us to reconsider what we believe is possible, to see scarcity not as an ending, but as the beginning of a more creative, more cooperative, and ultimately more human story. The echoes of these kingdoms are not trapped in the past, waiting only for archaeologists to uncover them. They are accessible to you right now from wherever you are. This story can move from something you watch to something you actively explore, turning curiosity into a personal journey of discovery. Let us begin with the most immersive step you can take without a passport, a virtual visit. Several major institutions offer stunning digital walkthroughs of key sites. You can navigate the narrow Sick and stand before the treasury of Petra through detailed online tours hosted by museums and cultural heritage organizations. Similarly, platforms like Google Arts and Culture feature extensive collections and virtual exhibits on ancient Nubia, allowing you to examine artifacts from the kingdom of Kush up close, from intricate jewelry to painted chapel walls, all with expert commentary. These digital portals dissolve distance, placing you in the center of the story. To build a deeper understanding, a few remarkable books serve as perfect guides. I recommend The Archaeology of the Sahara by David Mattingly, which focuses extensively on the Garamantes and presents the groundbreaking research that rewrote the history of the region. For a captivating narrative that reads like an adventure, The Lost Cities of the Sahara by Byron Kun de Prorock, while dated, captures the early thrill of discovery. For Petra and the Nabateans, Petra and the Lost Kingdom of the Nabateans, by Jane Taylor combines beautiful photography with clear historical analysis. On screen, seek out documentaries from major series like Nova or the BBC that specifically cover Petra's hydrology, the Green Sahara, or the kingdoms of ancient Nubia. These films bring the landscapes and the science vividly to life. Your investigation can also focus on the tangible objects these cultures left behind. The online collections of museums like the British Museum, the Louvre, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston feature searchable databases where you can find artifacts labeled as Nabatean, Meroitic, or Garamantes. Examine a pottery shard, a terracotta figurine, or a bronze spearhead. Look at the craftsmanship, the materials, and read the curator's notes. What does the object tell you about daily life, trade, or belief? This direct observation turns you from a viewer into a researcher, asking your own questions of the evidence. Finally, carry this perspective into your own world. You do not need to live in a desert to see the principles of adaptation at work. Look at your local environment. How does your community manage water, especially during dry seasons? What old buildings in your town use design features for natural cooling or heating? Are there historical trails or roads near you that follow ancient paths of trade or migration? The genius of these kingdoms was in observing their constraints and innovating within them. By asking similar questions about your own surroundings, you continue their legacy of thoughtful engagement with the world. You become an investigator of the human story, finding connections between the past and the present, and perhaps imagining solutions for the future. The journey through these landscapes of sand and stone ends not with a period, but with an invitation to see the world differently. We have walked through the echoing canyons of Petra, traced the buried waterways of the Garamantes, and stood beneath the steep pyramids of Kush. Each silent ruin we encountered was once a vibrant declaration, a proof that the most formidable environments can become the most fertile ground for human genius. These were not societies that merely survived, they engineered their own abundance, turning the desert's stark rules into a blueprint for centuries of prosperity. Their legacy is a masterclass in perception, teaching us that what we label a wasteland is often simply a landscape waiting for the right kind of vision. The true monument they left behind is not made of rock, but of idea, the revolutionary notion that scarcity can be the mother of profound invention. From the hydraulic symphony that fed a city to the social contracts that bound communities together, every adaptation was a choice to engage deeply with the world as it was and to imagine what it could be. This history does not belong to a distant past, it speaks directly to our present moment. As our own climate shifts and resources face new pressures, the strategies of these ancient kingdoms become startlingly relevant. Their focus on capturing every drop, on building with the climate, and on valuing long-term stability over short-term gain are not antiquated curiosities. They are essential principles for a sustainable future. They remind us that resilience is not about brute force, but about intelligent harmony, about listening to the land and responding with creativity rather than dominance. Let the stories of these desert architects inspire you to look at the challenges around you, whether personal or global, not as dead ends, but as complex puzzles awaiting a clever solution. See the potential hidden in plain sight, and remember that sometimes the most barren ground holds the seeds of the most spectacular growth. If this exploration of forgotten flourishing has reshaped your view of history and human potential, consider subscribing for more journeys into the deepest mysteries of our past. And we would love to hear your thoughts. Which of these resilient kingdoms, the rock-carved Nabateans, the water-mining Garamantes, or the pyramid-building Kushites, captivated your imagination the most? Share your reflections in the comments below.